Old Russian Chronicles or Old Russian Letopisi, a type of written sources in Old Rus, main type of Old Russian historical literature, composed from 11th to 18th centuries. Chronicles are among the most extensive monuments of Old Russian literature and one of the leading genres of it. Chronicles were main form of Russian historical narrative until the middle of the 16th century, the time of Ivan the Terrible, when they gave primacy to another historiographical genre, chronographs, copies. Old Russian chronicles survive in some hundreds opis. Some chronicles known in multiple opis, others in only one copy. Every chronicle was a svodi, i.e. collection because it included materials from some previous chronicles, which were revised, shortened or added, and entries on the events of the last years or decades belonged to the chronicler. The scala determined several tens of svods. Characteristic chroniclers were mainly churchmen. Old Russian chronicles were composed in monasteries, at the princely courts and in the offices of metropolitan. Chronicles often contradicted each other on estimation of events and in factual basis. Chronicles were a set of annual entries, that is, messages about the events which happened in each year. Mostly there were short factual entries, but sometimes chronicler used literary form of the narrative on the most significant events of Russian history. In annual entries, chronicler often included addresses and dialogues of princes, literary phrases, stable speech formulas, epithets, rhetorical figures and others. Alexei Shakhmatov was the largest expert in textology of Old Russian chronicles, and he considered that the main part of chronicle texts were svods, that is, collections of separate records from different sources, and every new chronicle was a svod of some previous chronicles and new historical records. However, in recent studies, besides svods, considerable part of chronicle text is admitted as annual records, which were regularly being conducted at certain state or church office, as West European annals. For example, hypothetical Novgorod Archbishop Chronicle was being conducted at the office of Novgorod Archdiocese from 12th to 14th centuries and was main basis of Novgorod First Chronicle of 15th century. Chronicle genealogy by Alexei Shakhmatov. Primary chronicle of the beginning of the 12th century is the oldest survived Russian chronicle, narrating the earliest history of Rus. However, Shakhmatov paid attention on abundance of entries of 11th century about Novgorod, which are read in Novgorod First Chronicle, but absent in Primary Chronicle. This and some others textual facts were a base for his theory on the beginning of Novgorod First Chronicle includes text older than Primary Chronicle. The scholar named it Primary svod and dated as the end of 11th century. This svod was also a basis for Primary Chronicle. If two or more chronicle coincide with each other up to a certain year, one chronicle copied from another of this chronicles had a common source, arrived to this year, older svod. Shakhmatov discovered and developed a method of study on chronicle genealogy, rested on deep textual analysis. Shakhmatov built extensive genealogy of Old Russian chronicles. He connected most of this chronicles and created genealogy table, in which extant chronicles of 14th, 17th centuries went back not only to Primary svod, but also to earlier hypothetical svods of 11th century and even to historical records of the end of 10th century. Shakhmatov's method and theories began a mainstream in Russian chronicle studies. History. According to scholars who are the followers of Shakhmatov, Russian chronicles were systematically being conducted since the middle of the 11th century. There were two centers of Russian chronicle conduct in the early period, Kiev and Novgorod, a result of Kievan and Novgorodian chronicle records of 11th century was Primary Chronicle, and also text containing in Novgorod First Chronicle. Primary Chronicle survives in Laurentian and Hypatian chronicles. These two centers, south and north, were remaining later. Chronicles of South Russian princedoms of 12th–13th centuries survives in Hypatian Chronicle. Hypothetical Kievan Chronicle, chosen from Hypatian Chronicle, was a continuation of primary chronicle and covered events from 1118 to 1200. Gaulish and Volhynian Chronicle, also containing in Hypatian Chronicle, covered events in Galician and Volhynian princedoms from 1201 to 1292. Chronicles of Rostov, Vladimir and Pereyaslav of Suzdal of the end of 12th, the beginning of the 13th century better remained in Laurentian, Radziwill Chronicles and Chronicler of Pereyaslav of Suzdal. Hypatian Chronicle of the end of the 13th, the beginning of the 14th centuries is an all-Russian SVOD in South redaction. It survives in Opis of 15th–18th centuries. Laurentian Chronicle of 14th century is a SVOD from Northeast Rus. One copy of 1377, Tverian SVOD of 1375 reflected in Rogorsky Chronicler and Tverian collection of 16th century. Chronicle SVOD, related with Cyprian, Metropolitan of Moscow, was continued up to 1408 and survived in Troitskaya Chronicle, which burnt in 1812. Fire of Moscow. It was reconstructed by Mikhail Prizyolkova Christus. Chronicle SVOD was made in Tver about 1412. It reflected additional revision of all Russian SVOD of the end of the 14th, the beginning of the 15th century. This Tverian SVOD reflected in Simeon Chronicle and Rogorsky Chronicler. Novgorodsko-Sofiyski SVOD of the 1430s was compiled at Office of Moscow Metropolitan and united all Russian and Novgorodian chronicles. The SVOD was preserved in Sofia First and Novgorod Fourth Chronicles. First known Moscow Grand Princely appeared at the middle of the 15th century. Chronicle SVOD of 1472 reflected in Vologda-Permennikona Chronicles. Basis of SVOD of 1472 was Novgorodsko-Sofiyski SVOD, edited by Moscow Grand Princely Chronicler, who brought censorship, excluded in particular the mentions of Novgorodian liberty, because Novgorod state was joined to Moscow Grand Princedom. In the end of the 1470s, Novgorodsko-Sofiyski SVOD, the SVOD similar to Troitskaya Chronicle and other sources, was compiled together. This compilation was censored even more than SVOD of 1472. The compilation of the 1470s reflected in Moscow Grand Princely SVOD of 1479, surviving in copy of 18th century, and in its later redaction was continued up to 1492. This SVOD of 1479 underlined all of official chronicles of the end of the 15th, the 16th centuries. The compilation of the 1470s also reflected in the first part of Yermolen Chronicle. The SVOD of Kirilo-Belozersky Monastery contained text independent of Moscow Grand Princedom. This SVOD reflected in the second part of Yermolen Chronicle and in so-called abridged Chronicle Svods at the end of the 15th century. Rostov Archbishop SVOD of the 1480s reflected in typographical chronicle. Another Chronicle SVOD of 1480s made an unofficial church sphere reflected in SVOD of 1518, which in turn reflected in Sofia Second Chronicle and Lvov Chronicle. IOASAF Chronicle was made the end of the 1520s at Office of Moscow Metropolitan. It covered events of 1437 to 1520. In the same years, the first redaction of Nikon Chronicle. A major source of Nikon Chronicle was IOASAF Chronicle. Nikon Chronicle was the largest Russian chronicle. Voskresenskaya Chronicle was another extensive chronicle. It was made between 1542 to 1544. In the second half of the 1550s, in the reign of Ivan the Terrible, initial redaction of Nikon Chronicle was united with passages from Voskresenskaya Chronicle and Chronicler of the beginning of Zardam Chronicle, of events of 1533 to 1552, i.e., the beginning of Ivan's reign. In 1568 to 1576, also in the reign of Ivan the Terrible, multi-volume illustrated chronicle SVOD. This SVODs was the last All-Russian Chronicles. They give place to another form of historiographical texts, chronographs. Chronicles of 17th-18th centuries were local, provincial texts, like Siberian chronicles of the late 16th-18th centuries. Development of Old Russian Chronicles were Lithuanian chronicles of 15th-16th centuries and Ukrainian chronicles of 17th-18th centuries. Some chronicles: Primary Chronicle, Novgorod First Chronicle, Galician Volhynian Chronicle, Hypatian Codex, Laurentian Codex, Academic Chronicle, Novgorod Fourth Chronicle, Radziwill Chronicle, Sofia First Chronicle, Novgorodsko Sofiaski SVOD, Sofia Second Chronicle, Nikon Chronicle, Illustrated Chronicle of Ivan the Terrible, Kazan Chronicle, Joachim Chronicle, Lithuanian Chronicles, Bychowiec Chronicle, Lvov Chronicle, Siberian Chronicles, including Stroganov Chronicle, Kungur Chronicle, Yesipov Chronicle, Remezov Chronicle, Pskov Third Chronicle. Some editions. Complete collection of Russian Chronicles. Russian, 1843, 1989, 1-38, 1950. 1941 to 1955, 1-2, 12-14, 1968 2, 1973, 15-17, 1976, 1472, 15, 1982, 410-443, 638-655. The Russian Primary Chronicle, Laurentian text. Translated and edited by Samuel Hazard Cross and Olgerd P. Sherbovitz-Wetzor, Cambridge, Massachusetts. The Medieval Academy of America, 1953. Excerpts of Primary Chronicle, including Founding of Novgorod by Rus, Attacks on Byzantines, and Conversion of Vladimir. Also mentions several Slavic tribes by name. A collation of Primary Chronicle by Donald Ostrovsky in Cyrillic is available at http hardch7 Harvard edu Ostrovsky PVL, together with an erudite and lengthy introduction in English. This is an interlinear collation including the 5 main manuscript witnesses, as well as a new paradosis, or reconstruction of the original, the Chronicle of Novgorod 1016 to 1471. INTR. C. Raymond Beasley, A. A. Shakhmatov.